if I were to upload this video of me banging through the gears, I would probably get a ton of comments saying stuff like this. I love double clutching and sing clutching like a granny and not double clutching like what the guy said below, and double clutching and granny shifted it. A normal person would just double clutch into second. He told me that I'm not double clutching, granny shifting, not double clutching like he should. But what even is granny shifting and what are you supposed to do instead? The opposite of granny shifting is double clutching. Double clutching works by, as the name suggests, double clutching. For example, if you want to shift from fourth into third, you will engage the clutch, move the shifter into neutral, let off the clutch, blip the accelerator because you're downshifting, engage the clutch once again, move the shifter into third and come off the clutch. Granny shifting is simply normal shifting. For example, if we now want to shift back from third into fourth. Now we will engage the clutch, move the shifter into fourth and let off the clutch. Now you might be asking yourself, why do people suggest to double clutch? Because it's definitely not faster. And the answer is because it synchronizes the gears inside of the transmission. Let me explain. This right here is your engine. Attached to your engine is a flywheel. This flywheel always rotates with the crankshaft inside of your engine. Inside of the flywheel we have our clutch. If the clutch is engaged, meaning it's pressed up against the flywheel, it will rotate with the engine. For the clutch to be useful, it needs to be connected to something. And this is what it's connected to, the so-called input shaft. On the end of the input shaft, you'll find a small gear. This gear is constantly meshed with another gear. Who could have guessed? This other gear then sits on another shaft, which is called the counter shaft. On the end of the counter shaft we will have two gears. In our case, our third and fourth gear. For these gears to have a different gear ratio to one another, we need two more gears. This one right here and this one right here. Of course, they need to once again sit on another shaft, which is the green shaft right here. This shaft is now finally called the output shaft, because it is connected to our wheels. Now you might be asking yourself, well, these two gears right here are spinning at different speeds. How can they sit on the same shaft? And the answer is pretty simple, because when taking a look at from the side, it actually looks something like this. This is our output shaft and this is our gear. And in between the output shaft and the gear, there's a bearing, allowing the gear to spin freely from the bearing. So when the clutch is connected to your engine, the engine will actually spin our input shaft, our counter shaft and these gears right here. But it will not spin our output shaft in green. To allow one of our gears to spin the output shaft and therefore also the wheels, we need something called the gear selector. Which is this part right here, which I had to pick up from under my table because it fell down. But anyway, this part right here has teeth on it, so do the gears. So if you want to engage the gear, we would simply move this gear selector over by moving our shifter, and if we want to now select another gear, we'll move it in the other direction. This gear selector now allows the gear to actually spin the output shaft. My paper special effects weren't the best idea, I'm gonna be completely honest. But now let's recreate what would happen if we want to downshift from fourth into third, which is the example we had earlier. So the gear selector is engaged with fourth gear right here. And this gear is spinning at, let's say, 2000 RPM. So this means that also the gear selector and the output shaft are spinning at 2000 RPM. If we now want to shift down into third, we will simply engage the clutch to take the pressure off of the teeth on the gear and the gear selector and move it into neutral. If we now were to move the gear selector into the third gear, we would hear a really bad grinding sound, because the third gear is only spinning at 1500 RPM. To solve that problem, we would simply disengage the clutch, move the gear selector into neutral, engage the clutch once again to allow the engine to spin this gear right here, blip the accelerator, so this gear will spin up to 2000 RPM. Now engage the clutch once again and move the gear selector back into this gear. This is the basic reason for double clutching, to sync up the speeds between your gears. But this is only needed in really old or worn transmissions, because new transmissions have something called a synchro, which looks something like this and like this. This is our gear and this is our gear selector. These yellow parts are the synchros. They will simply engage before the dog teeth can do. This will allow the gear to speed up and the gear selector to slow down, or the other way around, depending on which gear you're trying to shift into. This completely eliminates the need for double clutching. So most of the people who comment "stop granny shifting" actually don't know what they are talking about. I'll agree with them on one point. Slamming through the gears is really hard on your synchros, but if you do it every now and then, it won't be that bad. Therefore, for really hard shifting, double clutching can actually be a little bit better. But double clutching should mostly be used when driving a car without a synchronized transmission or a car with worn out synchros, because it puts way more stress on the clutch and all other clutch components like the master cylinder and so on. Therefore, I suggest you simply stay with granny shifting, even if some people on social media might hate.